Phonics to whole word. An unsophisticated academic brawl? Surely we're more sophisticated. At nursery school in the late 50s and early 60s, we started learning how to spell and write using phonics. About a year in, fashions changed as teachers switched to whole word. The new way is supposed to teach the meaning of words by usage instead of supplying tools for thought and communication. Shifting foundations while trying to construct an edifice of understanding caused confusion and serious long-term difficulty. There might be more than correlation between the identification and rise of dyslexia and whole word teaching. Despite that label, this strange mixture seemed to amplify my left field thought, which we all have to a greater or lesser extent. Associated with whole word was a declining focus on grammar. We were taught commas should be used when text suggested a breathing space, instead of referring to meaning. The belief that words are meaning evolved from circular academic philosophy, stating the meaning of words is their usage, and this appears to have triggered what grew into something close to contempt for grammar. This is an example of the sort of thing I'm talking about. He wrote about language, as if he knew what he was talking about, without a college certificate in education, as opposed to he wrote about language as if he knew what he was talking about without a college certificate in education. Even now I'm uncertain which one's right, but the first seems to make more sense, because commas separate three chunks of meaning, allowing them to combine and metamorphose into one. The creation of meaning in writing and expression in speech goes from atomic to simple to compound, then to compounds of compound. There can be several stages. For example, letters combine to metamorphose into atomic meaning. Words combine to create phrases with meaning, and so on to clauses, sentences, paragraphs, chapters, books, and pushing it a bit to libraries and cultures. Grammar helps and is often essential to identify chunks of meaning. However, words, by their singularity, do not need its assistance. Although some words can be combinations, avoiding the need for grammar to express meaning that might arise from adjacent words, such as extraordinary, failing to use commas or misusing them when trying to express something complicated can make understanding difficult, in some cases impossible, reducing sense to nonsense. Most philosophers speak some sense. Even Wittgenstein, who started with the ludicrous claim that reality can only be found through the analysis of words and language. This theorist, I'm loath to say philosopher, then claimed this was a terrible mistake, only to produce another, quite closely allied theory. In this closed system, he hypothesized humans as they are not, to conclude that meaning exclusively arises from how words and language are used. So doing, he ignores absolute foundations of human language, based on shared psychology of perception, brain structure, independent of the usage of culture. But there is some truth in cultural influence on language, particularly in current and historic loading. Orators know that using words with ancient roots can have a strange influence on audiences, unaware that admiration of a speech may arise from ancient, seemingly long-spent connotations or loadings combining to prompt emotional response. The likes of Boris Johnson used this device, sometimes to alarming effect. Wittgenstein's seemingly arcane discussion about word games is informative. Whole word is not totally flawed, although exclusive focus on that method has caused serious cultural and political damage to millions, possibly hundreds of millions of children, with massive long-term fallout. Encountering a new word, usage can help. So you continue, and with any luck, the meaning of a sentence can survive. Sometimes it takes more than one to work out what was meant. But this calls for short-term memory and extra focus. Phonics focuses on the sound letters make. It's usual to speak before spelling or writing. Language is used to express meaning when words are said. Others hear and interpret the meaning of what is heard. Words are not meaning. They convey meaning either internally, thinking to yourself, or to someone else. They are tools, not there to be analysed to divine reality or somehow magically produce meaning by checking how they are used. Usage presumes meaning. In any case, appealing to usage only goes from one heap of words to another. It's a cardinal error to mistake tools for the outcome of their use. Language is the codification of meaning expressed so that others can decode by combination and metamorphosis to recreate that meaning in their own heads. Meaning is not transferred between two minds, it's recreated in the minds of those who listen. Similarly, translations between languages is not direct. Things are far more sophisticated. A desired meaning is thought. When words are chosen in a form of reverse metamorphosis to express that meaning. Sometimes, when I forget a word, now getting more frequent, the frustration is in being unable to find the words needed to convey meaning. Once the words, phrases, sentences, or what have you are found, meaning can be conveyed, either to think things out in your head or to be expressed in writing or speech for others to metamorphose back into meaning in their heads. At its most simple, talking or writing to someone is in 4 stages. Desire to express a meaning, then words that can convey it, found by reverse metamorphosis of meaning, and for the recipient, combination and metamorphosis to recreate the meaning intended to be conveyed. Throw in translation, and the 5th stage converts language, expressing meaning by replacing it with another language to express the same intended meaning. With growing fluency, the somewhat tortured process of thinking what you want to say and then converting what you want to say into another language falls away, as direct creation of words, phrases, etc. to metamorphose into meaning straight into an alternative language occurs that is as effective, another language coming naturally as the one you first learnt. You can see by these words that, without grammar, expressing meaning can become tortuous or even impossible. Although held back by early confusion caused by a mixture of whole word and phonics, the good that they share was one benefit. But only recently have I focused on syllables instead of words as a whole. Goodness gracious me. Syllable sounds seem to make metamorphosis out of meaning less digital and more organic. Extraordinary, you might say. But there's no doubt that the meaning of words can be influenced by culture, which belongs to the intersubjective, injecting a relatively biased or left-field element, sometimes unintentionally, into meaning. Culture belongs in the intersubjective, which tolerates contradiction. To that extent, the words we use may have absolute foundations in physiology of perception and brain structure, but aspects, in addition to these, produce cultural nuances and loading that can influence thought and even day-to-day judgments and prejudices that unfortunately might seem to be necessary for everyday life. Jettisoning grammar was seriously mistaken. I suspect it was caused by the belief that words are meaning, based on assuming a process of perception and brain structure is irrelevant to learning language necessary to convert meaning into a code that others can decipher back into meaning, that they can understand. Meaning cannot engage with meaning, except perhaps if both are in the same head. Language is a tool to replicate meaning, carried by words from one person to another or others. The ability for one meaning to multiply by as many times as those who hear words is astonishing, reflecting the nature of ideas that makes them impossible to possess, in that they too can replicate by as many times as there are those who understand them. The intellectual brawl between whole word and phonics is based on relatively primitive, somewhat mistaken philosophical assumptions. Language is highly sophisticated, far beyond the closed system, logic-obsessed and strangely anti-rational fashion that partly paralysed academia for over a century, causing close to public ridicule of those who reduced philosophy to a senseless irrelevance. Thanks for that. It is a complicated subject, but I think it's worth looking into, because an awful lot of the trouble today has been caused by really simplistic philosophical ignorance, unfortunately caused by academia unwilling to break the bounds of what they think are authority. It's a pity.